was 23 when this happened, and to this day, I still can't stay in a stranger's house without feeling like I'm being watched. At the time, I had just moved back to my hometown after finishing school, and I was doing whatever odd jobs I could find. Most of them were boring things like dog walking, cleaning, or checking on people's houses while they were away. It was easy cash, and since everyone in town kind of knew everyone, there was a lot of trust involved. One afternoon, a family friend called me about a house-sitting job. A woman named Janice was going to visit her daughter out of state for a week and needed someone to watch her place, water her plants, and feed her cat. It sounded easy enough, so I agreed. She lived just outside of town in one of those split-level houses that hadn't been updated since the 90s. The siding was a faded blue, the shutters were crooked, and there was this long gravel driveway that crunched loud enough to wake the dead. I met Janice the day before she left. She was polite, maybe a little rushed, and walked me through the usual stuff, where the extra food for the cat was, how often to water the plants, where the spare key was hidden. The cat's name was Oliver, a big orange tabby that eyed me like I was already trespassing. I remember thinking he was the kind of cat that judged you from the moment you stepped in the door. The house itself felt dated. Beige carpets, floral wallpaper in the kitchen, and heavy curtains that made every room darker than it should have been. I didn't think much of it at first. Older houses always have a weird smell, like dust mixed with something faintly sour, but I told myself it was nothing. The first night was quiet. I microwaved some leftovers, watched TV for a bit, and then got ready for bed in the guest room upstairs. The cat curled up at the foot of the bed, which was oddly comforting. Nothing happened. No strange noises. No reason to feel nervous. But the second night, things started to feel different. It began with something small. I was brushing my teeth in the upstairs bathroom when I noticed the mirror on the wall didn't quite sit flush against the plaster. It tilted forward just slightly at the top, like it hadn't been mounted properly. I leaned closer and saw a small gap behind it, not wide enough to fit a hand through, but wide enough that it made me pause. The glass itself also seemed newer than the rest of the bathroom fixtures. It didn't match the sink or the old brass towel rack. At the time, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she'd replaced the mirror recently, but that feeling of being watched crept in for the first time right then. It wasn't paranoia exactly. It was more like my body noticed something my brain didn't want to admit. That night, while lying in bed scrolling on my phone, I kept glancing at the mirror through the open bathroom door. It was angled just enough that I swore I saw a faint reflection shift when nothing in the room had moved. The cat suddenly sat up, his ears twitching, eyes locked on that dark crack behind the glass. Then, almost on cue, I heard a faint clicking sound. It was so soft I thought I imagined it, a mechanical little tick, like the shutter of a camera lens. I froze, my phone screen lighting my face, and in that silence I felt every hair on my arms rise. The cat leapt off the bed and padded to the bathroom doorway, tail flicking. He stared into the mirror gap like he could see something I couldn't. That was the first time I realized this wasn't just another boring house-sitting job. Something was wrong in that house, and I was being watched. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept picturing that tiny gap behind the bathroom mirror. I told myself I was being dramatic, that it was just a loose fixture, but the sound of that faint click wouldn't leave my mind. When morning finally came, I tried to shake it off. I made coffee in Janice's outdated kitchen, watched Oliver circle around my legs demanding food, and convinced myself I'd let nerves get the better of me. I even stood in front of the bathroom mirror again, tapping the glass with my knuckle. It looked solid, nothing strange. Still, the feeling of unease didn't go away. That afternoon, I watered the plants on the back porch. The air was cool, the kind of late autumn chill that carried the smell of damp leaves. It should have been relaxing, but I kept glancing back at the house. Something about its windows made me feel like eyes were following me. The second night was worse. I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone when I noticed something odd. On the dresser across from the bed, there was a digital alarm clock. I didn't remember seeing it the night before, which made no sense. The thing was bulky, plastic, with bright red numbers that glared in the dark. At first, I figured maybe I just hadn't paid attention, but then I noticed the way it was positioned, angled directly at the bed. I tried to laugh it off, but that uneasy twist in my stomach came back. I picked it up, and immediately it felt heavier than a normal clock. The plastic was cool in my hands, almost too cool, and there was a faint hum coming from inside. My throat went dry. On the front, just above the numbers, was a pinhole-sized dot. At first glance, it looked like a motion sensor, but when I tilted it toward the lamplight, I realized the hole was angled perfectly at the pillow where my head rested. I set the clock down carefully, my heart pounding in my ears. The room felt suffocatingly quiet, except for Oliver. He was sitting upright on the bed, ears perked, staring at the clock shock like he knew exactly what it was. Then, without warning, he jumped off the bed and padded toward the hallway. His tail was puffed up, stiff with agitation, and that's when I heard it. A floorboard creaked, not from outside, not from the porch, from inside the house, somewhere below me, like in the living room or kitchen. Slow, deliberate weight pressing down on old wood. I froze, every nerve screaming. The house was supposed to be empty. Janice was out of state. No one else had a key except me. I grabbed my phone, hands trembling so hard I almost dropped it, and tiptoed to the top of the stairs. The air felt colder now, heavy in a way that made my skin crawl. I held my breath and listened. Another creak, this time closer, like someone had moved from the kitchen toward the hallway. I whispered Oliver's name, but the cat had already disappeared into the shadows at the end of the hall. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? That I found a suspicious alarm clock and heard a noise? They'd think I was paranoid. I crept back into the bedroom, shut the door as quietly as I could, and pressed my ear against it. For a long minute, there was nothing, just silence so deep I could hear my own pulse. And then, faintly but unmistakably, came that click. The sound of a camera shutter, not from the clock this time, from the bathroom mirror. My heart sank when I heard that sound coming from the bathroom mirror. It wasn't loud, but in the silence of that house, it was deafening. A faint, mechanical tick that left no room for doubt. Someone had been watching me and was still watching. I backed away from the door, shaking so badly that my phone almost slipped out of my hand. I thought about calling the police again, but panic kept telling me I didn't have enough proof. What if I was wrong? What if it was just some strange electrical noise? But deep down, I knew the truth. That's when Oliver hissed, loud, sharp, his back arched, eyes locked on the crack beneath the bedroom door. And then I heard it. Footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. They were on the stairs now. Whoever was in the house was coming up. I quickly switched off my phone flashlight and stood frozen in the dark. The only light came from the red glow of that alarm clock still angled at my bed. My chest tightened so badly I thought I might pass out. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. The floor creaked under the weight of someone standing there. I held my breath, straining to listen. Then, softly, almost teasingly, a voice called out, "Hello?" It wasn't Janice's voice. It was a man, low, flat, almost casual, like he was pretending he had a reason to be there. I didn't answer. My hand fumbled for the window latch, the same one I'd noticed earlier in the day. It was stiff, old, painted over too many times, but I managed to force it up just an inch before it stuck. The footsteps began again, this time moving down the hallway toward my door. The knob turned, slowly, testing. Oliver bolted under the bed, tail thrashing. I shoved the window harder, my palms sweating, until finally it screeched open wide enough for me to squeeze through. I didn't think. I just climbed out, scraping my knees against the sill, and dropped into the cold grass below. The moment I hit the ground, I heard the bedroom door swing open behind me. A shadow moved across the wall as I scrambled to my feet. I didn't look back. I ran. The gravel of the driveway crunched under my sneakers as I sprinted to the road. My lungs burned. My legs felt like they were giving out, but I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the nearest streetlight half a mile away. There, I finally pulled out my phone and called 911 with shaking fingers. When the police arrived, they searched the house. What they found made my skin crawl all over again. The alarm clock had been hollowed out and fitted with a small camera. The bathroom mirror, too, had a hole drilled behind it with a lens pointing straight into the room. Even worse, in the basement, they found a small setup, a folding chair, a monitor, and cables that ran through the walls. Whoever had been watching me had been sitting there the whole time, recording everything. But the house was empty. No sign of the man I heard. No trace of where he went. The police told me he must have slipped out through the back while I was running. To this day, they never caught him. I can't describe the feeling of knowing someone was in that house with me, listening, watching, waiting. I stayed at my mom's for weeks afterward, jumping at every creak of the floorboards. And even now, years later, I can't look at a mirror or a smoke detector without checking for that tiny black dot. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't the thought of being alone. It's the moment you realize you're not. My girlfriend and I thought we'd lucked out. It was a last-minute trip, and every hotel was either booked or ridiculously expensive. Then I found the listing, a cozy guest house on the edge of town, cheap with glowing 5-star reviews. The pictures showed a rustic little place with wood paneling, an antique fireplace, and a big back deck that overlooked the woods. It looked perfect, almost too perfect, but we were desperate, so we booked it. When we arrived, the host, a man in his late 50s named Mr. Collins, greeted us with a smile that felt rehearsed. His handshake intake lingered a second too long, his eyes just a little too sharp. He gave us the usual tour: kitchen, living room, bathroom, then paused at a heavy wooden door tucked at the end of the hallway. "This one stays locked," he said, jangling a key ring before slipping it into his pocket. "Storage only." We nodded, didn't think much of it. After all, most Airbnb hosts had private areas, but something about the way he emphasized it made my skin prickle. The first night was uneventful. We cooked dinner, watched TV, and fell asleep to the sound of crickets outside. But around 2 a.m., I woke up to a faint humming noise. At first, I thought it was the refrigerator. Then I realized it was coming from the wall behind the bed. A steady, mechanical buzz, like a fan or a hard drive. The next morning, I mentioned it to my girlfriend. She shrugged, said it was probably just old wiring, but I could tell it bothered her too. We tried to brush it off and went about our day exploring the town. That night, though, it got stranger. While my girlfriend showered, I sat in bed scrolling through my phone. That's when I noticed the smoke detector on the ceiling, perfectly centered above the bed, with a tiny blinking red light. Nothing unusual, right? Except the light wasn't blinking in the steady rhythm of a detector. It pulsed irregularly, like it was responding to something. I stood on the bed for a closer look, and that's when I saw a pinhole in the plastic casing. Small, almost invisible, but I knew exactly what it was: a camera. My stomach dropped. I climbed down, grabbed a chair, and unscrewed the detector as quietly as I could. Sure enough, inside was a tiny lens and a bundle of wires. Someone had been watching us. I wanted to storm out right then, but my girlfriend was still in the shower. I didn't want to panic her until I was sure. I shoved the detector under the bed and waited. When she came out, I explained what I found. She went pale. We whispered back and forth, trying to decide whether to call the police or just leave. But before we could make a decision, there was a knock at the door. 3 slow knocks. We froze. Through the peephole, I saw him, Mr. Collins, standing perfectly still, smiling like he knew exactly what we had just discovered. "Everything all right in there?" he asked softly. His voice was calm, but there was something in his tone that made my skin crawl. I told him everything was fine, that we were just about to go to bed. He lingered a moment, then walked away. But that night, neither of us slept. The humming in the walls grew louder, like a machine running just behind the drywall, and I couldn't stop thinking about that locked door at the end of the hallway. Something told me whatever was behind it wasn't storage. Neither of us slept that night. We just lay there, stiff as board, listening to that mechanical humming through the walls. It seemed to ebb and swell, almost like it was breathing. By sunrise, I had convinced myself it was some sort of old generator or maybe central heating, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. We packed our things quietly, deciding we'd leave as soon as we found another place to stay. I didn't want to confront Collins. I just wanted out. But when I went to check the front door, my heart sank. The deadbolt had been replaced. Instead of the brass one from last night, there was a new, heavier lock with a small keypad attached. I tugged and rattled, but it wouldn't budge. "He locked us in," I whispered. My girlfriend's face drained of color. "Why would he?" I put my finger to my lips. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of hearing our panic through the walls. We spent the next hour searching for another way out. Windows, back door, even the bathroom skylight. Every exit was screwed shut from the outside. That's when I remembered the locked storage door at the end of the hallway. The humming seemed strongest there, as though the walls themselves vibrated with it. "We have to know what's behind it," I told her. She shook her head, terrified, but she followed me anyway. The door was heavy, reinforced with 3 separate locks. Clearly, it wasn't just some broom closet. And then I noticed something else. Scratches along the floorboards just beneath it. Deep grooves in the wood, as if someone or something had clawed at the threshold trying to get out. My girlfriend begged me not to, but I couldn't stop myself. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and wedged it into the top lock. It wasn't perfect, but I'd seen enough tutorials online to at least try. My hands shook with sweat as I worked the blade back and forth. The entire time, the humming grew louder. It had a strange rhythm to it now, almost like a chant. After several minutes, the lock gave with a snap. I moved to the second, then the third. My girlfriend hovered behind me, clutching her phone like it was a weapon. Just as I was about to twist the final latch, there was a sound that nearly made me drop the knife. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, on the porch outside. Then the jingle of keys. We scrambled back as the front door swung open. Collins stepped inside, carrying a tray with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. His smile was wide, almost too wide. "Thought you two could use a pick-me-up," he said casually, setting the tray on the kitchen counter. I tried to play it cool, thanked him, pretended everything was fine, but I could feel his eyes lingering on me, then on the knife in my hand. He didn't mention it. He didn't ask. He just smiled a rehearsed smile and said, "Enjoy your stay," before stepping back outside and locking the keypad again behind him. The moment he was gone, my girlfriend broke down. She wanted to call the police, but the cell service was non-existent, and the Wi-Fi kept cutting in and out like someone was deliberately jamming it. We were trapped. I turned back to the storage door. Whatever was behind it, I knew it held the answer to what Collins was really hiding, and I had this sinking feeling we weren't the first guests to end up locked inside this house. I knew I shouldn't, but curiosity is stronger than fear sometimes. My hands trembled as I slid the last lock free and pulled the storage door open. At first, it was just darkness. A staircase led down into what looked like a basement, though in the listing, Collins had never mentioned the house even had one. The humming was deafening now, a low, vibrating thrum that rattled the banister under my palm. I motioned for my girlfriend to stay back, but she followed anyway. The air grew damp as we descended. The smell hit us halfway down, metallic, sour, like old blood. When we reached the bottom, my phone's flashlight cut across the room. What I saw made my throat close up. The basement wasn't storage. It was a control center. Against one wall, a row of monitors flickered with live feeds from inside the house. Cameras tucked behind vents, inside smoke detectors, even beneath the bathroom mirror. Every corner of the home was under surveillance, every private moment recorded. On the far screen, I saw us a live view from directly overhead, standing frozen in that basement. My girlfriend clutched my arm so tightly her nails cut into my skin, but the cameras weren't the worst part. Against the opposite wall, lined up neatly like a collection, were suitcases, dozens of them, each tagged with faded name. I recognized some from the guest book Collins had encouraged us to sign. And then there was the table, a long stainless steel slab under a harsh lamp, smeared with old stains that I prayed were rust but knew weren't. Chains hung from the ceiling, a drain cut into the center of the floor. The humming wasn't a machine at all. It was a recording, looped audio of muffled scream, echoing faintly from hidden speakers. I felt my stomach lurch as my girlfriend whispered, "We need to go now." We bolted up the stairs, but halfway to the top, the keypad at the front door beeped. The sound of unlocking. Collins was back. I shoved the storage door shut, but the locks were broken. It wouldn't hold. My mind raced. He couldn't know we'd seen. If he did, we were finished. We sprinted into the bedroom, tossing our things into bags, heartbeats pounding in our ears. I cracked the window and slammed my shoulder against the frame until the screws loosened. With one last shove, the glass gave way and the frame snapped outward. We didn't even bother with the luggage. We just climbed out, dropping into the wet grass behind the house. I'll never forget the sound as we fled into the woods, the creak of the front door opening, followed by Collins' calm, sing-song voice drifting out into the night. "You're not supposed to be down there." We ran until our legs gave out, stumbling onto a rural road where a passing truck finally stopped for us. We begged the driver to take us anywhere, just away from that place. When I later tried to report Collins to the local sheriff's department, they claimed the address didn't exist. No records of a property, no records of an owner by that name. But sometimes, late at night, I'll get an email from an address I don't recognize. No text, just an attachment, a still frame of me sleeping in my own bed. Back when I was 24, I had just moved into a new city for work. Rent was brutal, and the only way I could afford anything close to decent was by finding a roommate. I met Aaron through an online housing group. He seemed normal enough during our first coffee meeting. He was quiet, polite, a little awkward, but nothing that raised any alarms. He said he worked in IT, freelance mostly, so he'd be home a lot. That actually gave me some comfort. Someone around the apartment meant less chance of break-ins. The place itself was modest, 2 bedrooms, one shared bathroom, a small living room with peeling wallpaper. Nothing special, but it was affordable and close to my office. The first few weeks living with Aaron were uneventful. He mostly kept to himself, spent long nights typing on his computer, and never brought friends over. Sometimes I'd find him standing in the kitchen late at night, staring at the floor like he'd lost his train of thought. But when I said something, he'd smile sheepishly and mumble that he was just tired. I brushed it off. I had bigger concerns, adjusting to the city, proving myself at work, making ends meet. Aaron was quiet, paid his share of rent on time, and washed his dishes. That was more than I could say for my last roommate. But then small things started to bother me. I'd come home and find my bedroom door slightly ajar, even though I always made a point to lock it before leaving. Once, my desk chair was pushed back from the desk in a way I never left it. Another time, my laundry basket looked rifled through. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe I'd rushed out one morning and forgot to lock the door. Or maybe I'd moved the chair myself without realizing it. Stress has a way of making you see ghosts where there aren't any. Still, unease crept in. I decided to set up a small security measure of my own. Nothing fancy, just an old webcam I connected to my laptop, angled toward my bedroom door. It wasn't even hidden. I just wanted to catch myself slipping up to prove that it was me and not some phantom in the apartment. That night, I hit record before heading to bed. The next day, I came home exhausted. Aaron was in his room with the door shut, so I quietly retrieved the laptop to check the footage. The first few hours were boring, just me leaving, the room empty, the light through the blinds shifting as the day passed. Then, around 2 p.m., the doorknob turned. The door creaked open, and Aaron stepped inside. He didn't snoop around like I expected. He didn't touch my things or rifle through my drawers. He just walked in, sat on the edge of my bed, and stayed there, perfectly still, for nearly 30 minutes. Sometimes he'd tilt his head, staring at the camera like he knew it was there. Sometimes he'd look down at the floor, breathing slowly, his hands twitching in his lap. Then, just as calmly as he'd entered, he stood up and left, closing the door behind him. I sat frozen in front of the screen, my skin crawling. He hadn't stolen anything. He hadn't even moved, but somehow that made it worse. When I confronted him about it later that night, he laughed nervously, said he must have been half asleep, maybe wandering without realizing. He promised it wouldn't happen again. I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. After that night, I tried to shake it off. I told myself maybe Aaron really had been half asleep. People do strange things when they're tired. Sleepwalking, sleep talking, even wandering into the wrong room. It wasn't unheard of, but the excuse didn't sit right with me. Every time I passed his bedroom door, I caught myself wondering what was happening on the other side. The days that followed only deepened my unease. One evening, I noticed my toothbrush was damp before I even used it. Another morning, I found my phone slightly out of place on the nightstand, sitting at an angle I never leave it. A shirt from my closet went missing for 2 days, then reappeared folded neatly at the bottom of the drawer. I told myself I was just tired, that maybe I was forgetting things, but the rationalizations were wearing thin. Finally, I decided I needed more proof. The old webcam had worked once, but this time I bought a cheap hidden camera online, a tiny thing disguised as a phone charger. I plugged it into the wall across from my bed, angled perfectly toward the room. That night, I slept restlessly, half expecting to wake up and catch Aaron creeping in. But when morning came, everything seemed fine. I almost convinced myself I was overreacting until I checked the footage. Around midnight, the video showed my bedroom door easing open. Aaron slipped inside, barefoot, silent. He didn't go to the drawers or the closet this time. Instead, he crept toward my desk. He picked up my phone, turned it in his hands, and held it close to his face like he was smelling it. Then he placed it back down carefully, almost reverently. After that, he crouched near the bed, leaning so close to my sleeping face that for a moment I thought he might kiss me. I could see my own chest rising and falling, completely unaware, as Aaron hovered inches away, just watching. He stayed like that for nearly an hour. At one point, he whispered something I couldn't quite make out. My skin crawled as I watched him mouth words into the darkness. His eyes locked on me the whole time. And then, without warning, he reached out and brushed his fingers through my hair. I shifted in my sleep, and he jerked back, retreating toward the door. But he didn't leave right away. He stood in the corner, in the shadows, watching me until the video cut out. I slammed the laptop shut, my stomach twisting. This wasn't sleepwalking. This wasn't some harmless accident. I was living with someone who liked to watch me while I slept. The worst part? When I confronted him again, I couldn't bring myself to mention the camera. Instead, I asked casually if he'd been in my room. He just smiled and said, "No, why would I?" That smile, it wasn't nervous this time. It was knowing, like he was daring me to prove it. After that smile, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I had to find proof, something undeniable. So the next day, while Aaron was out at class, I searched his room. I told myself I was justified. After what I'd seen, after how he'd been creeping into my space, I needed to know. His room was surprisingly neat, almost sterile. His bed was perfectly made, his desk stacked with textbooks. It didn't look like the room of someone hiding something, until I noticed the vent near his bed. The screws were slightly loose, not much, but enough that I could see faint scratch marks around the edges. I crouched down, heart pounding, and pulled it open. Behind the vent was a small black case. Inside it were memory cards, dozens of them. I froze, staring at the little plastic squares piled neatly together. I didn't even have to check to know what was on them, but of course I did. I slipped one into my laptop and clicked open the first file. The screen filled with my bedroom. The angle was from above, pointing directly down at my bed. I felt cold rush through me. He hadn't just been sneaking into my room. He'd been filming me. Every file was was worse than the last. Hours and hours of footage of me sleeping, changing clothes, talking on the phone. He had been recording everything. But it wasn't just my room. Another video showed the bathroom. My bathroom. The angle caught the sink, the mirror, the shower. My face stared back from the screen as I brushed my teeth, completely unaware. I snapped the laptop shut, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't just creepy anymore. This was obsessive, criminal. I had to get out. I stuffed the memory cards back in the case and shoved it behind the vent exactly how I'd found it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely screw it back on. I didn't want him to know I discovered it. Not yet. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the apartment made me jump. The creak of the pipe, the hum of the fridge. I kept picturing Aaron standing over me again, whispering, recording. The next morning, I tried to act normal. I forced small talk in the kitchen, asked him about his classes. He smiled that same quiet smile, like he was playing a game I didn't know the rules to. But the worst moment came when he leaned against the counter and said, "You sleep really peacefully." I envy that. My stomach dropped. There was no way he could have known I'd been awake half the night, heart racing, unless he'd been watching again. I excused myself, locked my bedroom door, and sat on the edge of my bed, clutching my phone. I didn't know what was more terrifying, the fact that my roommate was watching me, or the fact that he already knew I knew. The morning after his comment about my sleep, I knew I couldn't stay in that apartment another night. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, but fear has a way of tangling you up, making you hesitate. What if he confronted me while I packed? What if he caught me trying to escape? So I made a plan. I'd wait until Aaron left for class, grab my essentials, and never come back. Simple. Except he didn't leave. The hours crawled by. I listened for the sound of the front door, the creak of his sneakers, but nothing came. He stayed in his room, waiting. By late afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to move. I opened my bedroom door, my backpack already slung over my shoulder, and found him sitting in the living room, just sitting there. No TV, no phone, no book, just staring at the hallway like he'd been expecting me. I froze. "Going somewhere?" he asked. His tone was calm, almost casual, but there was something in his eyes, a sharpness, a knowledge. My throat went dry. Just heading out for a bit." He tilted his head slightly, like a curious child. Then he smiled. That same smile I'd seen the night I woke up to him standing in my room. "You should stay," he said softly. "It's safer here." My pulse thundered in my ears. Without answering, I bolted for the door. I didn't even think. I just ran. Behind me, I heard the scrape of a chair, the heavy footsteps of him getting up. For a moment, I thought he'd chase me, grab me before I could get out, but the door opened and I was outside, sprinting down the stairs, fumbling for my phone. I called the police from the street corner, voice shaking so badly the dispatcher had to ask me to repeat myself twice. They arrived within minutes. I stood on the curb as two officers knocked on the apartment door. When Aaron answered, he looked perfectly calm. He even waved at me like we were neighbors sharing a joke. But when the police searched his room, they found everything: the hidden cameras, the recording, the memory cards, and worse, folders on his computer labeled with names. Dozens of them. I wasn't the first. I wouldn't have been the last. They arrested him on the spot. As they led him out in handcuffs, he turned his head toward me and whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "You'll miss me watching." Those words have replayed in my mind every night since. I moved out that same day. I changed my number, deleted my social media, even got a new job in another city. I wanted to erase every trace of myself he might have collected. But sometimes when I'm lying in bed, I still feel it, that prickle on the back of my neck, that sense of being observed. And every now and then, when I check my apartment window late at night, I swear I see a shadow across the street, just standing there, still, silent, watching.